Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today in this fifth session of the European Seminar of Private Pensions. We are about to start this session, and the invited speaker is Dr. Catherine Donnelly. She comes from the Heriot-Watt University, and she's going to talk about the snatching the feed from the jaws of victory, about collective defined contribution pension schemes in the UK. So thank you for being here today, and you can start.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come here. I've been really happy to hear everybody's conversations and hear about different pension schemes. So it's been really, really interesting. So I'm going to talk about CDC Pension Schemes in the UK. Perhaps I should say CDC Pension Scheme, because we've only got one that will be authorised or is authorised in the UK. So I'm also going to talk about the development of, not the development, but sort of where we are in terms of occupational pension schemes in the UK. So as we've seen before, so maybe I'll go back to this part later, but as we've seen from Carmen's presentation earlier, in the UK we've had this automatic enrolment to try and increase pension saving in the UK, and it's been very successful. So it started in 2012, rolled out to the largest schemes, and then progressively, larger companies, and progressively smaller companies have had to provide some kind of workplace pension scheme, and it has been very, very successful. However, same story as in the many other countries, with any similarity to this, is that we have the occupational pension schemes are generally either defined benefit or defined contribution. However, defined benefit schemes have been closing down for all the reasons we're probably well aware of, and more people have been saving in defined contribution schemes. We do have a lot more people saving into pension schemes full stop because of this automatic enrolment, but they're saving into defined contribution schemes. And there's a number of issues around this that I can think of in the UK. So one is that we used to have mandatory annuitisation. So it used to be you had to use your defined contribution pension schemes to buy a life annuity. So that was the kind of quid pro quo for saving your contributions into a pension scheme. However, in 2014, to the shock of particularly the life insurance industry, the government announced literally overnight pension freedom. So basically you could withdraw your pension however you liked, whenever you liked, sort of past age 55, but whatever you withdrew would be taxed as income in the tax year you withdrew it. And there was uproar among the life insurance industry in particular around this, but we had the end of mandatory annuitisation. And so what we've seen now in the UK is there's only about 10% of pension pots are used to buy life annuities. And the rest are, what I would say very loosely, are income drawdown, but that's probably over-egging it a bit. But basically, the rest of that money is not being invested in any longevity product. It's been either taken as cash lump sums to use as the individual obviously desires, or it's been put into, let's say, more official income drawdown products. So income drawdown is a UK word for using your pension lump sum savings to provide an income, but there's no longevity risk sharing in it. It's just you invest your money and you withdraw an income. But the sort of bigger problem is that there's no culturally accepted thing of what do you do with your money at retirement. So there's no fixed idea this is what you do. So for life annuities, we had years and years of really bad headlines in the popular press about life annuities. So it's seen as, these sort of thieving insurance companies, they're not giving you a good deal. And there were severe issues in the life annuity market in terms of lack of transparency, lack of competition, and these have been well documented by several people. So there were many, many issues. But now, what do we have in its place? We have people generally not buying life annuities, and they're being asked to make very, very complicated decisions about how to invest their money. what should I guess I'm going to get as future returns? How long am I going to live for? They can perhaps have worries about inflation, or perhaps not. How much income should I withdraw to live on? So these are, my opinion, far too complicated decisions for people. The other issue that Carmen has raised is that, we had this thing called automatic enrolment, where everybody in employment is supposed to, who's an employee rather, is supposed to have access to a pension scheme of some sort, and typically defined contribution. And the minimum contribution rate is a total of 8%, so some from the employer, some from the employee. And the issue is that it's not enough, right? I mean, compare that to, say, contribution rates in defined benefit schemes, and of course they fluctuate over time in line, depending on what investment returns have been and so on, but they're typically much higher, so 15%, 20%, those kind of rates as a percentage of salary. So people aren't saving enough. But saving enough for what, right? And if you ask people what do they want, a large number of them will say, in retirement, financially, they want a lifetime income, right? So I think this has to form the bedrock of whatever we're going to offer them as a pension system. But then this leads to the argument for an income-focused solution, right? And we also see that people are just clueless about pensions. That's not just in the UK, that's really many places. So, for example, the contribution rates, whatever the minimum contribution rate is, they'll pick that. Or perhaps there's some matching employer contribution that they'll pick up to the maximum of the employer matching contribution. But it's not really connected to what they're going to get as income in retirement. It's just a separate solution. You tick these boxes, that's a solution, how much you contribute. Then there's another separate decision, how should you invest your money? And you see there's a fund labelled the default fund in these, in the vast majority of the sort of typical defined contribution pension plans in the UK. And the vast majority of people will choose that, so 90 to 95%, because they don't know what else to do. They're just, I don't know, I'll just pick the default. I guess that's what I should do. We also see, as in other countries, so people just don't understand the decisions they're being asked to make in retirement. So for me, what has to happen is, in general, given the system we have in the UK, where the occupational pension schemes are extremely important, the basic state pension is very small, we need to have very, what I'll call strong default solutions that give people a reasonable income in retirement. And of course we can, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. There will be those who are more knowledgeable. They can opt out and do whatever they like. But we need to have a very strong default solution, and one that's going to deliver an income in retirement, right? So people generally think of an income in retirement as their pension. That's what a pension is in the UK. We also have a sort of element of the lump sum as well. So people at retirement can take 25% of their account value, of their fund value, as a tax-free lump sum. So it's like the reward for saving in the pension scheme, and they use that to pay off their mortgage. Maybe they do some house renovations. So it sort of gives them a little nest egg to start their retirement, and they can then get their pension income if that's what they've chosen to do. But for me, the UK frameworks that say the current cultural ideas of what a pension is, which is an income, this leads me to say that really we need an income-based occupational pension system or pension schemes. And this leads me to say that either it's going to be some government-sponsored, or government-constructed scheme, but basically there's no appetite for that in the UK. That's not going to happen. Given everything I can see at the moment, and otherwise it's the pensions actuaries who can deliver this, right? Because the pension actuaries are used to setting up defined benefit pension schemes. That's all their expertise. So in the UK, we have many, many defined benefit pension schemes. So we have, thousands of them, over 5,000. We don't have these large industry collective pension schemes that you see in say, the Netherlands. There are many, many extremely small pension schemes. Now we can say that's probably, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but basically we have whole industry, pensions actuaries industry around this, because each scheme needs a scheme actuary, it's called, so they're a statutory role to report on to value the liabilities, compare them to the assets, and set the contribution rate negotiation with the agreement with the employer and so on. But basically, there's a whole army of pensions actuaries with expertise who, when setting or designing these defined benefit pension schemes, have the idea in their mind, oh, we should provide 2/3 of the income at retirement or 50% of the income at retirement as a pension, annual pension. So they have this idea of what it should be. If we just leave it up to individuals to figure this out, I just think we're going to continue with undersaving, a lot of undersaving. So we can design schemes where there's a kind of the employer's paying some contribution, the employee's paying some contribution, and the individual could also make additional contribution as well to buy more benefits. We could certainly do that. So then that leads into the previous presentation from Abraham about the additional saving through whatever means. But I think there has to be some kind of primary income-based solution. And in the UK, the pensions actuaries are the people best placed to do that. Now, this is all really, it's aimed at this. What I'm talking about is aimed at private sector workers. So I'll occasionally maybe go back to my presentation slides. But you can see from this slide here, so the public sector is dominated by defined benefit pension schemes, and most of them are pay-as-you-go, though there is the local government pension scheme is funded, but mostly pay-as-you-go. But the private sector, the majority of people either have, the majority of people are in some sort of defined contribution arrangement. So in this thing, they have these small words, but basically the occupational defined benefit is the dark purple line, that bar that's on the right-hand side, and these blue and sort of magenta red colours, these are all effectively variations on defined contribution scheme, just with, you can put in different assets and you have different flexibility about what funds you invest in and so on. But basically, most private sector workers are working in defined contribution. And the pension actuaries advise private sector employers, right? So they're well placed to do this. So summary situation, sort of the facts are defined benefit pension schemes are closing down, and most workers are saving into a defined contribution pension plan. However, what do they do at retirement, right? So at retirement, they could either buy a life annuity or do some sort of income drawdown, or just take the money out as a lump sum, which is encouraged in some way for small pension pots. But again, no cultural idea at what to do exactly, and then that leads into a whole issue of linking your actions in terms of contributions and investment choices to what are you going to get in retirement, right? So that all just falls down if there's no, this is the standard thing people do. And that's a problem for us. Okay, so this new thing in the UK, so we had pensions freedom, and the government basically said, go and innovate to the life insurance sector, and nothing's happened really. Okay, so we're just tinkering around the edges around investment strategies and, presentation of ideas, but no real fundamental change. So then what happened separately to that was there was a strike by the Royal Mail staff, right, so the Royal Mail is like the national postal service in the UK, and they have a lot of workers, so here it's really hard to see, so around 150,000 employees in the UK, so a very large scheme, considered large in the UK. And they had a defined benefit pension scheme, and what happened was that the total contribution rate, or maybe it's just employer, but it would have been probably the employer contribution rate on the defined benefit pension scheme climbed to 50% of salaries, and the employer said that we can't pay that, that's just too much. That's not going to happen, and they're facing a lot of competition from, the various other postal providers and delivery services. They said, we can't do this. And the Royal Mail staff went on strike because the Royal Mail company said, we're going to take away the DB pension scheme and give you DC. And the Royal Mail staff is heavily unionised, and they went out on strike about this. So, various back and forth, and eventually the Royal Mail company ended up in a kind of government-sponsored reconciliation service called ACAS. They ended up there with the trade union, CWU, and they agreed on 3 things for pensions, right? So they agreed that pension savings should be in the form pension. And so the kind of mantra of the CW was a wage for life, right? So that's what they wanted. And if you say that, that rules out DC in the current format, because DC pension savings in the UK just bring you up to your retirement date, and then they don't do anything after that. So you have to do something about that to make a decision. So that ruled out DC. Then they wanted two more things. So they wanted three things. So the savings in the form of pension. Then they wanted predictable costs that were within the Royal Mail Company's budget. Predictable costs, which is kind of a little bit, well, DB, maybe, depending on your strategy, which led to the third aim, that they wanted to invest in return-seeking assets with the aim of having good returns over the long term. And then if you invest in return-seeking assets, there's risk, volatility, and that leads to unpredictable costs, which rules out DB schemes. And so what they decided was the thing that could satisfy these three aims were collective defined contribution pension schemes. So there had been an earlier push by the UK government to, under this sort of defined ambition, they call it defined ambition strategy or push really, to try and, I guess, see if there's appetite for CDC pension schemes or something else. I'll just keep an eye on the time as well. Just stop in 7 minutes, so I'm not going to get very far. But anyway, but that sort of died a death, basically. There was a lot of talk some years ago about, oh, what about the Dutch schemes, It died a death. Anyway, because of this agreement from the union, the CWU and the Royal Mail Company, they worked really hard to make this happen, right? So the government, the regulators were quite open. You know, they were willing. Their door was open in a sense, though I guess the people involved say probably not as much as they like, perhaps. But they had a lot of effort and push, and this is about 7 years' effort to get to this point that we have finally not only got the law and the regulations in place, but I've just had this new Royal Mail Collective Pension Plan authorised in the UK. Right, so this is a scheme, and it's been forged from where it came from, right? So it's been forged from a DB scheme, effectively. So it looks very much like a DB scheme. Involved in the creation of it, so with this sort of mandate from this agreement between the company and the union, there's been a few pension actuarial consultancies who have designed this scheme. So they've been a couple of them on the design, some checking and so on, right? So really a fairly small number of people involved in this. And it looks basically like a defined benefit scheme. It's a whole life scheme, so the members are in it from their working life until retirement. It's the aim to deliver a wage for life. So I probably won't get onto that because I won't have time, but there's various cross-subsidies going on that are, some of them unique, two of them unique in particular to this particular UK scheme. And the third one is just a common cross-subsidy, common one for all CDC or risk-sharing schemes. Now, what have we seen in the industry, right? So who's going to talk about the CDC schemes? Who's going to try and push them? Well, it's going to be pensions actuaries talking to their clients who have defined benefit pension schemes in general, these defined benefit pension schemes might be highly likely to be closed to new entrants and new accruals as well from existing members. And we haven't seen anyone else come forward to also want to have a CDC scheme like the Royal Mail one in terms of a whole life. Now, at the same time, so related to what Carmen was saying, so the university pension scheme called the University Superannuation Scheme. So it's one of the top 10 pension funds in Europe, actually. It's massive, so it's got like, I can't remember, it varies obviously, say around £80 billion in assets. And because of disputes about that, there was again strike action, and I myself stood in the picket line on this. This was thought perhaps this would be the next CDC scheme, but it hasn't happened, and I think they sort of stepped away from that because there's definitely talk about it a few years ago, but they sort of veered away from that, and they're probably sticking with the DB pension scheme for the immediate future. But no one else has really come forward, and the pension consultancies have now changed from talking about whole life schemes to decumulation only, so post-retirement. So basically, the idea seems to be you would save in a DC pension scheme, and then at retirement you would go into a post-retirement decumulation. The most likely vehicle will be these things called master trusts, which are somewhat at arm's length, let's say, from an employer and will be allowed for multi-employers, right? So we could get more aggregation of people in these schemes, which I think would be a good thing. Now, the issue for me, so maybe just to say in the last couple of minutes, the issue for me in these schemes is that, so they involve both longevity risk sharing, which I think is a very good thing, right? Because if you pull your longevity risk to people, I will just interchangeably use longevity and mortality risk, you remove this idiosyncratic longevity risk, right? So you're not sure exactly how long I'm going to live, but if I can plan my income along in line with the distribution, then I can make more efficient use of my money. So that to me is very clear benefit for everybody. And of course, you're left with the systematic longevity risk, but let's say it could be managed, it could be borne by the people in the scheme. But the other thing with these, this Royal Mail type scheme and the other ones proposed by industry, by the pension secretaries, is investment risk sharing. And to me, that's more, it's less clear what are the benefits in that. It introduces a lot of cross subsidies and perhaps in some way, one could say less robustness. So for me, the future should be not investment risk sharing unless there's a clear proven or highly likely case that it's going to be beneficial, but it should definitely involve longevity risk sharing. And why do I say a snatching defeat from the jaws of victory? Because the consultancies are perhaps having a view of things, coming from their own background, they're coming from defined benefit pension schemes, they have their own view of how things should be because that's what they're used to, and perhaps their clients are used to that. But there's a lot of risk, well, really money transfers, you could say, risk transfers in this particular CDC scheme that are not necessarily in the best interest of everyone. And there's ones that actually you can know who's going to benefit in advance. It's not like we're not really sure who's going to benefit from this. It's like we know the first generation will get a much higher pension than the later generations because of the way they've designed this scheme. And we know that the younger members in the scheme are bearing a lot of the risk on behalf of the older members. So they reduce risk for the older members and they increase the risk for the younger members. So the younger members are in a sense the buffer in this particular scheme. There's no explicit buffer, but in fact it's the young people. Right, so there are some issues around that, and they are proposing a vision that must have these CDC schemes that must have investment risk sharing as well as longevity risk sharing. And I don't think we shouldn't be proposing that. We should be focusing rather on longevity risk sharing and not doing investment risk sharing unless there's a very clear benefit to it. And we can look at the other schemes like the Q Super scheme mentioned. There's one, the Lifetime Pension Fund in Canada, and they seem to be doing longevity risk sharing, none of this. I can't say no investment risk sharing. There's always a little element of it because of we're looking at future cash flows when we decide how much income you should be withdrawing and so on, but we shouldn't be trying to do that too much. So I guess I'm probably going to be, I'm going to finish because we have to end here, but I didn't get very far into my presentation, but we can have our discussion later on about this. Yes, so we're going to finish now, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stevie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interesting talk, and especially for making it shorter than
it's
probably you expected.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, is there for questions? So here you have.
I have many questions, but I understand that's very interesting. Thank you very much. But a very quick one. You started saying about this need of advice that cannot be provided individually. But what about artificial intelligence and robotics? Could that be a solution eventually?
So, well, perhaps eventually, but there's just so little engagement from people, and they just don't understand anything. And I don't think the answer is education. Of course, we should have some minimum education, but we shouldn't require them to understand anything. They should just say, I pay my money and I've got a pension. That's what people think. And these statements they get trying to tell them how much money they have, just meaningless to everybody. I actually remember when I started work, my first job, I got the pension scheme booklet and I just thought, I don't understand any of this. And I was going to work in a pensions consultancy as a trainee actuary, and I just threw it in the drawer and that was the end of it. So I don't think people, I mean, from everything my experience and reading, the various papers on the financial literacy, I don't think we should expect very much from people.
I'm not so sure, because
Yeah.
I mean, people worry about that, and people are concerned. But usually, I mean, they're ashamed to ask. But probably they would be less ashamed to ask a computer. And it happens in some, I mean, people asking for a mortgage, it's easier, or a quotation for insurance. But people are more prone to do it to a computer than having a rejection for a mortgage or a loan from a bank executive. And
So in the UK, so I can't remember which country was it Poland? They have something similar, I think, in other countries. So they're trying to work towards what they call the pensions dashboard, which is bringing in all your pension schemes so you can see what it is. So this is a big issue, because I have about 5. I have membership of 5 different pension schemes, and it's not, it's just different information at different times. So that's the first thing. And then yes, because we should have that linked to a very clear app of some sort that says, this is your current income you're going to get at retirement. If you want to get more, you should be contributing whatever, and we can work all that around it. But it is extremely important that happens, because otherwise people are like, I don't know, I've just got a pension. I don't know what type it is, DCDB, I've just got a pension. That's all I know. Yeah.
Any question? No? Okay, so today we are going to finish with this session, but the working part. Now we have the leisure part. We are going to visit this historic building of the University of Barcelona, and then we are going to have dinner in a very landmark part of the Barcelona, near Las Ramblas. So thank you to you all for being here again, and let's enjoy the rest of the day.